Hey, Hunter, when I say dog, what's the first type of dog that pops into your head?
Okay, so right now it's the Beagle for some
Okay,
reason. That's the standard dog in my mind.
that's an
That's
interesting choice.
Snoopy. But if I were to think about it more, a bunch of other breeds would come to mind, or just a dog that's a bunch of, a mutt, like,
A mutt.
just that's a bunch of dogs mixed together. And and I also think about dogs being small, medium, and large, I think for some reason.
Absolutely. I mean, so the reason why why I had this as our introductory question for today, and I can tell you when I first think of a dog, obviously I'm thinking of my dog first.
Right.
And listener, there'll be a picture on the Substack page if you want to take a look at my cute little pup. But otherwise, I would say that, and the reason why I answer this is that there are certain cultures that gravitate to specific breeds of dogs, and that's going to play a lot into our story today. And so I would not have been surprised, Hunter, if you had said Labrador or a golden retriever. Just
Yep.
knowing where we are
Yep.
located here in the United States, those are two very popular dogs within the United States. But granted, the United States, has a lot of different breeds of dogs, so a beagle might also be appropriate.
Yeah, it's probably not the most popular one, but when you asked, that's the one that jumped into my mind.
And everybody's different. Everybody has something that they associate with. And again, I can't stress this enough. We talked a lot about cats last week. This is sort of the quasi part two of our two-parter episode on dogs, but just how much the breed of dogs will factor into today's episode, because there's a unique geography around that. And that exists for our cats as well. And we talked a little bit about that last week. We talked about the Siamese cat, for example. But certainly for dogs, this is, I would say, a lot more prevalent, a lot more, people gravitating towards specific breeds.
Yeah, when you go adopt a cat, maybe you have something in mind, and some people are very specific. I mentioned that I sort of had a specific idea, and but like, what is a cat that likes me at the
Right.
shelter? But I think with dogs, people do a lot of research. It's more common to do more research and to be looking for a particular breed. And of course, some people just go get a dog too. But I see what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. So today, if you haven't picked up on it yet, today we're talking about the geography is your pet dog. Now, obviously, this isn't going to be specifically about your pet dog, listener. We're not tracking Fluffy around to see where they might go and what they're doing in your house, but broadly about sort of the aspect of pet dogs and sort of what does it mean and sort of where is it prevalent and all this fun stuff that goes with these creatures who are so intrinsically tied to humanity and people, and they have been for a long time. So we're going to talk a lot about dogs today because, it's something that a lot of us have, come in contact with at some point in our lives, especially if you're in the United States, but broadly and globally as well. Dogs are very popular. So let's jump back. So last week when we did the history of cats, we ran through some of the evolutionary history of cats, and that and factored in dogs a little bit. We talked about sort of the cats and dogs might have come from a single species.
Yeah, we went way back.
We went way back. This is, we went, I think, I'm struggling to remember the exact
60 million years or something.
60 million years. We're not going to go 60 million years back today. Instead, we're going to stay sort of within the confines of sort of human history. So let's go back, to sort of, prehistory sort of era. So this is all very early human history. All of this is still sort of being figured out. Everything that we're going to sort of run through today, there are theories, there are hypotheses. These are, archaeologists have done a number of works, and I should have called out already that a lot of my information is coming from a number of sources, including National Geographic and the ASPCA and all this other fun stuff. But then also I found a really helpful book called The Genius of Dogs by Brian Hare and Vanessa Woods, who both have a lot of knowledge in evolutionary biology and sort of wildlife, I guess, journalism, writing, that kind of stuff. So a lot of my information is coming from those two today. It was a really good book, really a fascinating read. So all that's to say is that everything we're talking about today, might have happened, might not have happened in the exact way. And that's just sort of history as best as we can tell it. So let's jump back. So to sort of when dogs might have become domesticated. So There is evidence from archaeology and DNA that suggests that dogs were first domesticated from wolves between 20 and 40,000 years ago. Now, if you did listen to our cat episode, we talked a little bit about this inside that episode where I had said that dogs were domesticated somewhere between 40 and 60,000 years ago. And that's my bad. That I didn't have my notes in front of me at the time when we were doing the cat episode. So just know that it is 20,000 to 40,000. That's what scientists believe. So that said, this would potentially make them one of the first species, if not the first species, to be domesticated by humans. I do have here that from the National Geographic, they have a really lovely article from a few years ago that there is also some potentiality there that goats were the first domesticated animals. Mm-hmm. Again, history being history, we're not able to track these things quite as well as we might like. So
we'll probably never know.
But what we can say is that dogs have been domesticated for a long time. So
that's right.
So goats probably came around the same time, maybe a little bit after, maybe a little bit before. And of course, then we have things like chickens, which was about 10,000 years ago. And then, larger animals, horses, cows, XYZ. This all, some of this tracks with sort of the rise of agriculture. And I think what we're going to find is that domestication of dogs from wolves is still well within that period of time. That's more hunter-gatherer sort of period. And there's right. Absolutely a reason for this, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So going back, so early humans likely came into contact with wolves as both species were drawn to similar environments and sources of food. And so humans, similar to wolves, like they would hunt in sort of groups. They would hunt similar animals being, roughly sort of the same size. I mean, obviously we're, taller, but, there's still a similar aspect that we're hunting a lot of the same animals and creatures. And so we would often congregate around the same hunting grounds. So wolves and humans, right, going after the same things. And so there's two theories that have been proposed to sort of explain how domestication may have occurred between from wolves into sort of what we would think of as sort of a normal dog today. And so the first theory is called the self-domestication theory. And that is that wolves, with less fear of humans, they would have scavenged from human camps, gradually becoming more integrated into human communities over generations. And the friendliest and most useful of these wolves were probably more likely to be tolerated. I think that probably makes sense. They might have been fed, and eventually they might have even purposely been cared for by humans, right? And so, again, as we engage in sort of some discussions around breeds, there's going to be a lot of sort of conversation around breeds that are more or less susceptible to, friendliness, obedience, all that kind of stuff. And I think what this theory is trying to explain here is that this actually tracks back to when dogs were still wolves, but there were still differences in sort of the wolves. The wolves that were likely easier to be tamed were probably more likely to be domesticated well into the future. And so that's the self-domestication theory. And I think, and Hunter, maybe I'll just throw this out. Is that the theory that you're most familiar with? Because
yeah, I guess so. I mean, I'm thinking it could have been a situation where some pups were abandoned or encountered by people, and people may have started to keep them as part of their operation, part of their lives, which is a little bit to the side, but kind of similar to what you're talking about, I think. But yeah, this makes sense. Is that the wolves came to us maybe at one point.
Right. And so the reason why I asked you that question is because I think this is often touted as the authoritative theory that the self-domestication theory is the one that sort of is, at least in popular culture, at least in sort of the maybe some of the mythos around dogs, is that they domesticated themselves to humans because there was so much, there was so much compatibleness between us and them.
There was benefits to doing so.
There was benefits to it. There is also another theory, which is the active domestication theory, that proposes that humans purposely went out and tamed and bred wolves, selecting those that would be more docile and useful. That would be something that would probably be more akin to the traditional domestication process with almost every other animal. I don't know how well this tracks with cats off the top of my head, but certainly, you think of, cows and goats and stuff like that, right? There's a usefulness to them. Therefore, humans go out, they capture them, they domesticate them themselves. So there's the active domestication theory that does the same with wolves. It's not as common within sort of the theories around dog domestication, but it's a lot more common with other animals. That said, the idea of humans going out and taming and breeding wolves seems a lot more dangerous to me than having the self-domestication theory wherein those animals come to you and sort of start that process unto themselves.
It could be both, right? I mean,
this very well
not necessarily one group of people who domesticated an animal and then it all comes from that group. So it's, I mean, I don't know what people who study this thing all the time think, but to my mind, it's possible that there could be a mix of these things.
Absolutely. And there very, very likely could be some mix or, happening in different places. It happens, in both ways. But over generations, these early dogs that were derived from these wolves through the domestication process, they would evolve distinct characteristics that were separate from their wolf ancestors. And so this was likely driven by a combination of natural selection. So, for traits that are beneficial in a human-centric environment, a dog, would thrive better than a wolf. For example, there's this concept of the lone wolf. And if you're not familiar with wolves at all, even though they do largely travel in packs, there's, a singular wolf will often leave and travel by itself for long stretches of time. That is not something that is common with dogs. I'm not going to say that's never happened with a dog. I'm just going to say that dogs are very much pack and pack animals that like to have their others around, whether it's humans or other dogs.
I had heard that the lone wolf thing was somewhat mythical.
No, I mean, it just happened recently. So OR7 here in Oregon, he was a wolf it was the very first wolf that traveled to Oregon.
Right. Famous.
I mean,
around here.
He would link up with a female wolf and have some cubs, but then he would apparently go on by himself for quite a long time as well.
All right. So that's a real thing.
So it's a real thing. It might be exaggerated, right? I don't think that a wolf is alone forever. I think that's sort of the ideology around this sort of lone wolf is that, it's always by themselves and, it's completely independent. I don't think that quite tracks, but there does appear to be times when a male wolf, I think, especially will be solo for periods of its life.
Okay.
And we can track that through a wolf such as OR7. Just getting back to it. So, these traits, were often sort of beneficial in a human-centric environment. But then there's also sort of artificial selection, right? And so this would be where humans intentionally bred dogs with desirable traits. And that it's sort of at this point, and this has been happening for thousands of years now, that we start to get sort of the different breeds of dogs that have a penchant for one thing or another. And so, for example, Hunter, if I were to say the Australian cattle dog, what would you think that the Australian cattle dog is good at doing?
Herding cattle, I'm guessing.
Herding cattle. Yes, absolutely. And so there's a whole breed, sort of subsection of dogs that's called herding dogs, and that they are natural herders, not hurters. Herders, they herd things. And they will do that. They will, corral a group of, sheep, goats, what have you, into a single area. It's their job and becomes something that they're very good at. And this is sort of what we start to see humans do, is to start breeding dogs that have sort of these natural traits, and sort of it gets amplified as they get bred and bred and bred. And so the role of sort of these early domesticated dogs, they would have had, they would have varied across different communities, but generally have thought to include, hunting partners, right? I think that's probably pretty obvious. Wolves were really great hunters. Dogs are also still really good hunters today. So they would help in tracking, cornering, retrieving game. Obviously, their keen sense of smell and speed would have been very valuable in these hunting scenarios, things that we as humans just can't even pick up on, right? Dogs also make for really good guards. as it turns out. And I don't think that's going to be a surprise to anybody who's listening to this, because dogs are loud. They can bark loudly. They can protect. If you train them right, they can, serve a really useful purpose in this area, right? So dogs could protect human settlements by alerting humans to the presence of predators or strangers. And this would have been very beneficial, especially for these early communities that were more tribal, right? There weren't really a lot of, for example, walls to be built at this point of time. And so having a dog that could alert to, let's say, if we're in Africa, for example, and there's tigers, there's a pride of tigers going around, that dogs could alert that, hey, there's some, animals that might want to hunt you. Or hunt us, I should say, because they're at that point, they're probably pretty involved in sort of the tribe. And then finally, also for companionship. So, even in these early societies, it's likely that dogs were recognized for their loyalty and companionship. Again, that's probably not super surprise to anybody here. I would say if I were to ask you for a single trait, Hunter, of what a dog's most known for, you would probably say loyalty. At least one, it would be up there. And so as humans migrated across the globe, and we talked a little bit about this with cats, their dogs went with them. And so over time, these dogs adapted to different environments, climates, and this would lead to the development of distinct breeds. So, if I say, Hunter, dogs in Russia, what might you picture?
Like a Saint Bernard or something like that.
Saint Bernard, that's a good one, right? Something that has a heavy coat. A husky, right? Something that's going to be able to, dogs that are going to be able to survive, sort of cold and harsh winters. And this would be very different from dogs that are sort of raised in tropical environments. And we're going to talk a lot more about some of these dogs later on in the episode.
One point of clarification from something we said a few minutes ago. Tigers are not native to Africa.
Oh, I thought I said lions. Oops. Sorry.
I think you said tigers.
Yeah. Well, I meant lions.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyways. Yeah. So, but let's sort of leave sort of some of the early history behind. Let's just go ahead and start talking maybe about some of the ancient civilizations, sort of how they've interacted with dogs a little bit. And, as we run through a few of these, and I think we're only going to run through 4 of them, but obviously a lot of different civilizations have a lot of different history and stories around dogs. I think you're going to pick up on a trait here, and that is, regardless of what dogs are used for today and what they've been bred for today, we can pretty easily say that most dogs were bred for hunting, companionship, and guarding. That seems to be something that tracks really around the globe, even without any sort of direct interference by other cultures. Just seems to be something that dogs have always naturally been gifted at. And so
independently, these functions developed independently in different places.
It's sort of what it seems like. And there's probably minor differences here and there. So let's talk a little bit about Egypt. So in Egypt, dogs were highly respected in ancient Egypt and were often featured in artwork and religious texts. Maybe not quite as much as cats were. Obviously, they were more godlike, I would say, cats, that is, in Egypt. But dogs were still highly respected there. And so various breeds were recognized, including hounds, and these would be sort of like greyhound type dogs, right? Dog very skinny, probably very fast, something that would allow a dog to, maybe not perish underneath the excruciating, desert sun. And then these dogs were kept for hunting, as I said, and as companions. So some dogs were even buried with their owners, indicating sort of their higher status. Mm-hmm. The earliest remains of the domesticated dog in Africa was found in the Nile Delta and is dated around 4700 BC. And so that would be, that's 7,000 plus ish years ago, maybe almost 7,000, I should say. Let's go ahead and jump over to Greece. So in ancient Greece, dogs were valued for their loyalty and protective instincts. So again, not a surprise here. And Greece would be where breeds such as the Molossus were renowned for their size and strength, and often used in warfare and guarding. And I think warfare might be the first instance that we start to see dogs used in warfare, which is kind of a unique aspect of sort of a dog's job, and that they can actually be used to help conquer and retain territory from other armies. I can't say that for certain, but it seems to track with what I was able to find. Jumping over to China. So dogs in China were considered a symbol of loyalty and good fortune. They were often, again, used for hunting as guard dogs and as companions. I told you this was going to be a theme.
Yep.
Various dog breeds such as the Chow Chow and the Shar Pei, which were developed in ancient China, and they have very distinct appearances that make them still very easily recognizable today. And in Chinese mythology, dogs are often associated with positive attributes. And we'll talk a little bit more about sort of dogs within mythology in a little bit here. And then there's Mesoamerica, because Mesoamerica is a little bit harder to track. I always try and include some aspect of the historical aspects around whatever we're talking about within the confines of Mesoamerica. And we have some information that we can sort of glean here. And so there's the ancient Maya, Aztec, and other civilizations in Mesoamerica. They had these dogs primarily for work, including herding, hunting, and protection. Herding, might be the Mesoamerica was the first one in my research that called out dogs specifically for herding. I didn't find that the same way for Egypt or Greece, so I thought that was pretty interesting. There is some evidence that suggests dogs were used in religious ceremonies or sacrifices. So that is an aspect of dogs in this culture. There's also a dog. It's called the Cholo Intzcuintli, which is an ancient dog breed that has been present in these cultures for over 3,000 years and was believed to guide the dead through the underworld. And so we're going to talk about this dog in a little bit, and I'll give it another name when we do talk about it, because there's a very famous movie that has one of these in it that we'll talk a little bit about. But I think broadly, dogs were depicted in various forms in Mesoamerican artwork and glyphs, showing their sort of significance in these societies. And so this sort of tracks through, we can go through probably every ancient civilization and do something very similar, from the Indus Valley civilization, ancient, Japanese, probably Aboriginal civilizations in Australia. All of these places seem to have some sort of dog, and we're not going to run through each one of them, but this sort of gives us an idea of, okay, what are some of these cultural perceptions and uses of dogs? And we can see that, well, a lot of them are using them in very similar ways, and sort of leans on sort of this animal's natural abilities around, guarding and sort of their loyalty and their companionship towards humans. So with that, let's go ahead and take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk a little bit more about dogs and mythology and religion.
Nice.
And I think that should be fun. Although actually, I did want to mention just before we left, we talked a little bit about dogs in warfare, and so I had sort of started to prepare a section on dogs and sort of working, and just it seemed to get a little bit outside the bounds of what I wanted to talk about. But I wanted to highlight that dogs have had a number of jobs throughout civilizations that go well beyond sort of the three that we've mentioned here. And so we've seen dogs who are obviously used for transportation, right? Sled dogs, by the Inuits, and even today there are sled dogs up in Alaska and places like that. There are dogs that sort of were used for not hunting, but more in agricultural environments, such as searching for specific plants. So another sort of aspect of feeding themselves. There was dogs that would, be within seafaring cultures, and they would travel on ships through, Polynesian cultures and that kind of stuff. Even the Vikings, right? So dogs factor in a lot of different jobs that I would argue few other animals, domesticated or not, have as many jobs as dogs have, even up to today, when now we have dogs that are, for example, servicing people who are blind so that they can move about the world in a safe manner. So I just wanted to call that out, because I'm not going to talk about it too much more going into the other parts of this episode. So with that, let's go ahead and jump to a quick ad break. We are back. We are talking about the Geography is Your Pet Dog. And so we've just ran through a bunch of sort of ancient history, sort of some theories around how dogs were domesticated. And we sort of started leaving off with talking about some of the cultures around dogs and how they interacted with dogs. But I thought what would be fun is to actually talk more about some of the mythology and religious aspects of dogs, because mythology and religion is about as pure a form of culture, at least in terms of, ancient cultures as we can get. And so we're going to run through a few different cultures here, and we're going to sort of see where sort of dogs sort of touch base with these cultures and how they're represented within their various religions. And so again, let's go back to ancient Egypt. And we talked a lot about ancient Egypt with respects to cats. And I think even still to this day, cats are more associated with Egypt than dogs are, but dogs have their place. Mm-hmm. And so in ancient Egypt, dogs were highly revered in ancient Egyptian society. And there was one god in particular that features very prominently as a dog, or a type of dog, and that is Anubis. And that's the god of death, mummification, and the afterlife. And Anubis is depicted, if you're unfamiliar, with the head of a jackal, which is sort of a type of dog. It's sort of a genus of dog. But also, within ancient Egypt, pharaohs had hunting dogs, and the death of a pet dog was treated with very significant mourning. So again, it's not quite as heavy, ancient Egypt, that is, with dogs, it is with cats, but there's still this aspect of it within sort of the religious life. And I think certainly Anubis being a very prominent god.
It's interesting that in Egyptian society, and many other societies, the cat was a symbol of fertility. And here we're looking at the dog as associated with the god of death.
It is interesting.
So it's a pretty strong contrast between the symbolic role of these two animals.
Yeah, it is. It's very interesting. And, I didn't read too much into sort of the why Anubis was depicted as a dog, but I do know that, death wasn't, often considered to be, I think we see this with a lot of ancient cultures and sort of the religions, death is not the end of things. It's more of the next right. chapter, the
passing
next
on
phase.
To the next phase. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I think that helps maybe talk about it, if I can riff on that a little bit, as you think about a dog being such a strong companion and being so loyal, having the god of death also be represented as a dog might help ease the fear of that a little bit. That's entirely just a quick hypothesis from me. I don't know. I'm not an ancient Egypt expert here. In Greek and Roman mythology, because they share a lot of their mythology, although they're called different names. There's actually one, I don't know how much Greek mythology you know, Hunter, but there's actually one very prominent Greek mythological beast within Greece. And do you know what that beast might be?
It's associated with guarding the underworld, right?
It is. Yeah.
I'm not sure I can recall the name.
No, that's totally fine. You're right on the money of what it does. And it's a dog called Cerberus.
Multiple heads, right?
Multiple heads, 3 heads. Exactly. Yep. So it's a 3-headed dog. It guarded the entrance to the underworld in Greek mythology. And so again, it plays into sort of the natural traits of dogs, guarding, something that a lot of civilizations used. But dogs were also associated with healing deities like Asclepius, whose sacred animal was a dog. Temples dedicated to Asclepius, known as Asclepions, often had dogs sort of just roaming around the grounds. And that would be kind of similar to sort of cats in Egypt, where cats were just sort of roaming around. And that kind of makes sense too. If we think about dogs, we think about one of these early traits of them being companions and very loyal. Again, you would associate that as something that's going to help you heal and something that's going to be near you and care for you. And so we see that here within the Greek and Roman mythologies. Let's jump over to Celtic mythology, or Celtic mythology, I should say. So my USA is showing a little bit here. So dogs were important in Celtic mythology and were often associated with healing, similar to Greek and Roman. And there might be a connection here. I'm not sure. The Irish mythological hero Cú Chulainn, that hero's name literally means Culaine's hound. And so dogs were often seen as very powerful protectors, symbols of loyalty and faithfulness in Celtic culture. Jumping over to Hindu mythology, there's a god that's called Yudhishthira, which is the king of righteousness. And this isn't a god, this is a king. But the mythology goes that the king refused to enter heaven without his faithful dog, which was revealed to be the god Dharma in disguise. And so, again, a lot of what we're seeing here is cultures sort of imbuing onto this animal their feelings of loyalty and companionship almost above all else. And so during the festival of Kukur Tihar in Nepal, dogs are honored, garlanded, and given special treats as part of the Hindu tradition there. We see in Norse mythology, the god Odin had two wolves, Geri and Freki, by his side almost at all times. And additionally, the giant wolf Fenrir plays a major role in mythology. Yep. So for the Norse mythology. So I believe I have here in my notes that, and again, I'm not a Norse mythology expert here. This is just from my notes that Fenrir was foretold to kill Odin, who's like the king of gods, during the events of Ragnarok, which is sort of the apocalypse, as foretold by Norse mythology. And then, going back to sort of Native American, Mesoamerican mythology. So many Native American cultures have myths and stories that involve dogs, and dogs are often within these cultures, often seen as spiritual guides and, again, symbols of loyalty. Probably not a surprise, though it should be pointed out in some stories, particularly in the more Mesoamerican areas, the dog is also perceived as a trickster spirit, similar to, of course, the coyote, which would be not a dog of itself, but of the same genus.
The fox has that reputation too, right?
The fox absolutely has that reputation. Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting because, again, if we think back to sort of our cat episode, I think one of the traits that would go with cats is that they're a bit of tricksters, right? They like to hide and sort of, I used to have a cat that would love to play like sort of like a hide and seek type game. Sort of relying on their hunting prowesses of right,
and they jump out at you like as if they could take you down or something.
Exactly. Yeah. And what I found out through this episode is that dogs themselves, as sort of we know them today, I wouldn't say have as much of that that trait in them, but similar sort of genuses of the canine variety, such as coyotes, such as foxes, definitely do. And I think, all of this sort of builds, I think, up to a point where, there are some similarities between cats and dogs that probably did go back, millions and millions of years ago. Let's go ahead and leave there. I was going to have, some notes here on maybe some other religions, but let's go ahead and leave this behind and talk a little bit more about sort of the spread of specific breeds around the world, because that's where a lot of our story starts going. Mm-hmm. And so obviously obviously dogs have been spread around the world through thousands of years, through migratory patterns. As we mentioned, sort of in the first part of the segment, people would go somewhere and their dogs would go with them. But during the early part of colonialization, dogs were carried on ships during long voyages, and this sort of led to the spread and global spread of very specific types of dogs.
This is European colonialization we're talking about.
Exactly. Right. Yep. And this is sort of where we start to see European dogs become much more dominant within societies around the world, right? So, if we go back to sort of our episode on beer, or our episode on tea, or our episode on a lot of episodes, we often see that the European flavors, the European preferences end up being spread around the world and become the dominant variety. And that usually happens through colonization. And so that kind of tracks here with dogs as well. And so dogs were brought to the Americas by European colonizers. Now, we've already talked that there were dogs in America already. That is a fact. I'm not saying that this is the first instance of dogs, but Europeans brought their dogs with them. And then they would interbreed with the local American dog populations. And eventually a lot of these breeds of dogs, these sort of native breeds of dogs here in North America and South America, would be replaced entirely. And so there's just a lot of dogs that we just don't really have all that much information about because they no longer really exist in sort of the same form that they might, at least a little bit today. Interestingly, probably the most well-known African dog, the Africanus, was not brought over by European colonizers and maintains its dominance on the continent today. So this is sort of the exception. And so this is a dog that appears to be descendant of dogs that were bred in the Nile River Valley some 7,000 years ago. And though it's not often thought of highly, the Africanus dog is very smart, intelligent, and very agile. And apparently Europeans, as they were colonizing Africa, they really did not like this dog. It was not something that they thought was a good dog. They didn't think it was something that was, highly sought after. They actually gave them the name mongrel. Obviously, that word has been around for a while, but this, when they would see this, it would just be called a mongrel. So owning one of these dogs for a long period of time was seen as being, of lower class or being of a native family or something like that. So today, Afrikaners, I think, are much more highly respected within the continent of Africa, although I can't say that for every country within Africa, but I think broadly the reputation has recovered. So just, I think overall certain breeds have experienced dramatic spread due to colonization and specific events and trends, right? So for example, the popularity of the Saint Bernard dramatically increased after tales of their rescue efforts in the Swiss Alps became popular in the 19th century, right? So we can track that. Similarly, certain breeds such as the Labrador Retriever became globally popular due to their characteristics of being well suited to various roles, from hunting and retrieving to acting as service dogs. And so broadly, for example, if you see a dog leading a blind person, there's a solid chance that that's a Labrador of some kind, whether it's yellow, black, or chocolate. And it's because they are particularly attuned to that kind of service. And so let's maybe end this section a little bit and sort of talking about some of the societal perception and uses of dogs around the world today. And so we're going to talk broad strokes, Hunter. We're not, there's always going to be exceptions.
Of course.
Yeah, I want to call that out because I feel like it's very easy for somebody to say, well, that's not quite, the case for every single dog. And now I'm going to go ahead and say that absolutely is true.
Right.
But let's just maintain that these are sort of the scholarly perception of dogs in essentially Western countries. So we're thinking, the Anglosphere, Europe, Australia, that kind of thing, versus sort of the Eastern cultures, India, China, that kind of stuff. And so in Western societies, many Western societies, dogs are often seen as family members, right? And I can definitely attest to that myself. My dog is definitely part of my family. He's very loyal. He's my companion. And I cherish him highly. I think that's probably pretty familiar aspect that people have that relationship with their dog here in the United States, and I would probably say within much of Europe as well. In addition to companionship, dogs serve many roles, including, as we already mentioned, guide dogs for the visually impaired, search and rescue dogs, police dogs, therapy dogs, right? So there's all these different jobs, and there's dogs who live on farms, and herd things. There's a lot of different jobs for dogs that we've sort of adapted their natural traits to be amenable for, because one, we know we can train them, and we know that they have these traits, and they're already so prevalent in with our life and sort of our culture that it makes it easy to sort of adapt them to these roles. And then also dogs within Western media feature very prominently, and this further sort of influences and has influenced their perception. So within movies, for example, dogs are often depicted as very heroic. It's not often that you see a movie depict a dog in a bad light. That's not to say it hasn't happened. Again, there's always exceptions, but broadly, they're often depicted as very heroic. They're also always usually depicted as very loyal. And then even, dogs are often, featured in very comedic roles, right? And so the first example that sort of popped in my head when I was thinking about this was the movie Air Bud. And Hunter, are you familiar with that movie?
Not familiar with Air Bud.
So Air Bud is a movie. I think it's from like 1995 or something. It's about a dog, and I think it's a golden retriever who becomes very good at basketball. And it's a dog that plays on a basketball team in like a high school or something like that. It's supposed to be very light. It's obviously made for kids, but it's supposed to be very light, fun, all this kind of stuff. There's also the Snow Dogs movies, very geared towards kids, but it's, same idea. And then, there's even a very famous Disney movie called 101 Dalmatians. And Hunter, I know you know this movie, right?
I am familiar with 101 Dalmatians.
Yeah. And so the entire point of that film is really to showcase the cruelty of humans versus the purity of dogs, right? So oftentimes within Western culture and media, dogs are really upheld as, very highly regarded creatures, oftentimes, sometimes in addition to the human characters, but oftentimes also in contrast to the human characters.
If I think of television shows from a little bit before my time, but that were still kind of well known. These characters, I'm thinking of Lassie, Rin Tin Tin,
Mm-hmm.
Benji, that are all these extremely smart, loyal dogs that save the day every episode kind of thing. And then you don't get that treatment for cats, really. Like that's their
Exactly.
you get there was a show, That Darn Cat, right? That shows the sort of idea towards cats a little bit. So yeah, dogs are held up, particularly I think, in the United States as heroic, as loyal. And then I think of Jack London's White Fang, which they used to have people read in elementary school. That's probably not as true anymore. That's the story of a wild dog that comes in contact with somebody. And
interesting. I did not read that book. I don't think as a in elementary school or whatever.
They already kind of dismissed that one by the time between when you and I were in elementary school, I think.
Yeah. Well, anyways, to your point, yeah, and as I was running, as we were running through last week's episode of Cats, and I think at one point I talked about Sabrina the Teenage Witch, which features a cat, and obviously that's very comedic. It's a very comedic show, but it still has this connotation of being, connected to sorcery and wizardry and witches and all this stuff that has a very dark past within European and sort of U.S. sort of cultures, right? And just how different that is compared to sort of the perception of dogs within media. If we go over to some of these Eastern sort of cultures and societies today, sort of perception of dogs in Eastern societies, it can vary wildly. So in some cultures, dogs are valued as companions, just as in the West, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about Japan, but the Japanese really highly value their dogs. In Hindu traditions in India and Nepal, dogs have a very complex role, with street dogs often being fed and cared for by the community. And so we see that in some of these cultures, dogs they're still highly valued, but more as a community aspect, rather than inside Western cultures where a dog is like, my dog is my dog, right? It's not the community's dog. It's my dog. And so there's actually, this isn't in India or Nepal, but there's actually a really great documentary called Stray. This is from a few years ago, maybe 2018 or 2017, that follows around a pack of stray dogs in Istanbul, and sort of their everyday journey. And it's really about this communal aspect of caring for dogs. And so in this documentary, the dogs have, this sort of role within some of these communities there, where people take care of them, they feed them, but they're not owned by any of these humans. These dogs sort of travel and go where they please. And this sort of flies a little bit in sort of maybe some of the stereotypes around dogs, around being intrinsically loyal to specific people, right? We talked about sort of that king from before, that that his dog he wouldn't go into heaven without his dog because his dog was so loyal to him. And this sort of flies in the face that dogs are perhaps mostly just loyal to humans, or they see the inherent value of being around humans, which I think is probably more of a realistic and animal instinct basis there. I already mentioned Japan, but in Japan, dogs are very popular as pets, and they're often very pampered. And so they have their own very specific breeds that are very keyed into sort of what it means to be Japanese a little bit. So the Shiba Inu and the Akita, for example, have a huge amount of cultural significance.
In Islamic society, and things are always changing, right, with culture, but traditionally there has been a preference for cats as pets, and dogs were seen as less desirable. And so it's interesting that things are different from place to place.
Yeah, and I think that still holds up. So again, going back to that documentary Stray, again, I can't recommend this film enough. It was really, really touching. It was really lovely to see. And the filmmakers do a really good job of not actually interfering with the dog's daily lives. And you can really tell that. But what you ultimately see is that while these dogs are cared for communally, there's a lot of people who will care for these dogs but won't touch them. won't, because there's still perceptions around them being dirty. And they're street dogs, so they're naturally, they are going to have quite a bit of dirt on them. But there's that cultural perception as well of people wanting to care for these dogs and seeing that, these animals are quite lovely, but at the same time, the cultural beliefs that still interfere with them interacting with them directly. So I think that still holds up, and that cats, I think, are more popular within sort of the Islamic cultures, probably for that reason.
That's right.
Or at least one of those reasons. Oh boy, time just flies by when you're talking. we got to do another ad break here. So we will do that ad break, and we will be right back.
Coming right back.
And we're back. We're about to close out our episode on geography as your pet dog. And I thought what might be fun as we sort of, come to a close here is to, similar to what we did with cats, Hunter, is sort of run through some of the statistics, global or otherwise, as best as we're able to sort of talk about where we seeing dogs the most. And so I have here, and we're talking about global dog population. I have here that the global dog population is estimated to be around 500 million dogs. Now, this number, Hunter, varies wildly depending on the source.
Of course, there's no way to really know.
There's no way to really know, right? I mean, even when we get into sort of the country numbers here, these are all just estimates because, well, there's no dog census.
Right. There's no way that these things are categorical. There's no categorical definitive statistics on most things, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if we're being honest, the amount of human population we have is still just an estimate. There's no, we can't accurately count every single human.
That's right.
Certainly for something like dogs, and we talked about this within our cat episode as well, that, these are sort of numbers that are coming from a source that, has done something to try and get at this number. But by and large, it is an estimate. And so with that, Hunter, I'm going to ask you, and you probably have my notes right in front of you, so it's probably not going to be a surprise, but I'm going to ask you, what is the country which has the highest dog population?
My guess would be the United States, just because we're one of the largest countries in terms of population in the world, and a lot of people of enough affluence to have pets.
Absolutely. Yes. The United States, I mean, and I think this tracks as well. You were talking about Lassie and sort of these dogs that were within popular culture within sort of the middle part of the 1900s, that the U.S. has actually had a pretty prominent history with dogs for quite a long time. And they've been elevated to a level where, getting your kid a dog, on their whatever, 6th birthday or something, when they're young, it's sort of seen as a rite of passage almost, right? There's that idea of the quote unquote nuclear family, the, 2.5 kids, where that 0.5 kid is actually the dog, or at least I've heard that interpreted in some manner. But yes, the USA is absolutely the country with the most amount of dogs, as far as we can tell. These numbers are coming from the ASPCA, the American Pet Products Association is where I'm getting my numbers from. And so they're estimating around 75.8 million dogs. This would be followed up by Brazil with 35 million.
Apparently
China
Brazil
was around
has
20.
The largest percentage of small dogs. Like, that's really popular in Brazil. I was reading that when I was reading about cats. I'm not sure.
Oh, interesting.
True, yeah.
I didn't come across that. So they a lot of their dogs are small, more like Chihuahua types, I'm guessing.
I'm not sure if they're quite as small as Chihuahuas, but probably not German Shepherds.
Well, and that's something that we haven't really talked a lot about, is that we've talked a lot about breeds, and we're going to talk about some breeds before we end the episode today. But one of the things that definitely classifies dogs is sort of this idea of small, medium, and large, right?
Right.
Like, all dogs, factor into sort of these weight class sizes, even to the point where you're going to rent an apartment in an apartment complex and they say, only small breed dogs allowed. And it's, of this certain weight class. And that's something that's definitely does not appear to be the case with cats.
When we talk with my family, about maybe one day getting a dog, the first question is, well, how big a dog should we get?
Yeah. Because you
Or
can
how
get a
little?
St. Bernard.
Yep.
That's a big dog.
That's a big one.
Or you can get a Chihuahua, which is, a dog that's smaller than your cats.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whenever I see a small dog, I'm like thinking, my cat's bigger than that.
Yeah, exactly. Just continuing on with our list. So this would be followed by China with 27 million, and then Russia with about 15 million dogs. And of course, none of this is per capita, right? So, obviously, if we did this per capita, and I probably could have, but I wasn't just in the mood to do all this math. So we're just going to take these
some
numbers.
People have multiple dogs, so that doesn't really necessarily wash out. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, I was actually kind of surprised. So, as we run through this list, goes, Japan, Philippines, India, Argentina, and then we get our first European country, which is France, at about 7.5 million dogs. And I was a little surprised by that. I would have thought the UK would have been a little more represented there.
I also associate France with smaller dogs as well.
I do too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And our top 10 list here would end with Romania at about 4 million dogs. So, and, some of these countries might actually have more dogs or less dogs. Maybe these countries are a little bit misordered. For example, maybe the UK does have more dogs, and, the sources that I was able to find just aren't showing that. So again, that's our caveat here of these data. If we get into some of the ownership rates, because we're already starting to talk a little bit about that. According to the American Pet Products Association, approximately 63.4 million households in the U.S. owned a dog in 2020. And so that would mean that if we go by the 75.8, that quite a lot of households have more than one dog. And I think that probably tracks if you have friends with dogs. It's not uncommon for a few of them to have, two dogs, for example, or more. In Europe, approximately 25% of households reportedly own a dog, with higher ownership rates in countries like Romania and Poland. And I have a fun little Statista graph here that shows Romania definitely the high point, with about 45% of all Romanians having a dog. And this would be, just sort of going down the list with Germany, for example, at about 20%, France at about 20%, all this kind of stuff. Again, within this list, this is about European Union, so the UK is still not represented. So apparently once UK decided to leave, all of their statistics went out the window.
Well, I mean, there's continental Europe, and then there's the UK and Ireland, and not always considered to be the same. Yeah,
exactly. Yep. Anyways, let's get back to some of our statistics here. So, in terms of breeds and popularity, and again, we're going to talk about breeds as we sort of close out this episode, but the Labrador Retriever has consistently been the most popular breed in the United States, according to the American Kennel Club. So AKC, you might be familiar with the acronym a little bit more. This would be the organization that, handles the pedigree of dogs and tracking sort of whether they are quote unquote pure or not, all this kind of stuff. And I think they're also the ones that primarily handle all of the dog shows within the United States. I could be wrong about that, but I feel like that's the case. In the United Kingdom, the French Bulldog has seen a sort of pretty dramatic rise in popularity, as recorded by the Kennel Club in the UK. And so there's the English Bulldog and then the French Bulldog. If you're not familiar with both those dogs, go and look up a picture of them, because they actually look quite a bit different. And you might understand why the French Bulldog might rise in popularity over one. I think English Bulldogs are actually very, very beautiful, but I also know they have a lot more health issues than the French Bulldog due to sort of the stoutness of their face.
And that's the breeding has led the dogs in that direction.
Absolutely.
With pugs as well, there's an issue that there's a lot of respiratory issues or breathing issues. Based
absolutely.
On the breeding. Yeah.
I do wonder, because and this is totally an aside, but English and French have always had a sort of contentious history. Even today, they're friendly today, but there's still a lot of rivalries that go into it. So I do wonder how people in England might feel that the French Bulldog is supplanting the the English bulldog over there a little bit. There's also another very popular dog from England. And Hunter, actually, do you know what this dog might be? And I'll give you a hint. It's attached to the royalty.
I don't. I'm not. I'm not coming up with it.
Totally fine. This would have been a total random fact for you to know, but it's the corgi.
Okay. All right.
So Queen Elizabeth, recently passed away. She was very well known for having corgis always, and so over just the last few decades, the corgi has seen a really dramatic rise in global popularity on the backs of the monarchy.
There's Corgi Con, which is a con related to just this particular dog. All these sort of low rider dogs getting together. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So there's some stray and homeless dog statistics we can use. We talked a little bit about abandoned pets in our cat episode. So the World Health Organization estimates that there are more than 200 million stray dogs worldwide. This estimate varies based on different definitions and sort of the counting methods of, quote unquote, stray. And so, here in the United States, there's a common perception of sort of reservation dogs. And these would be dogs that sort of just travel around in packs through sparsely populated areas, typically in Native American reservations. And I think there is some debate over whether these are truly stray dogs, because a lot of these reservation dogs, for example, are cared for communally in a similar manner as dogs within sort of Istanbul, for example. And so are they really stray? Well, they don't have a home, but they are still cared for, right? In the United States, it's estimated that animal shelters care for about 3.3 million dogs each year, according to the ASPCA. And so I don't have stats on how many are euthanized, mostly because I didn't really want to look into that number, to be honest. So I'm sure you can find that, listener, if you care about that. And then just, some spay and neuter rates, because that's always an important aspect of this. Always spay and neuter your pets if you can. In the United States, the ASPCA reports that about 83% of pet dogs are spayed or neutered. And so these rates can be lower in other countries due to various factors, including access to veterinary care, differing cultural attitudes towards spaying, neutering, that kind of stuff. But generally, 83% in the United States are spayed or neutered. And again, I would have liked to have had more facts and figures from other countries. But again, the U.S. is a very dog-centric country, I would say, more so than most. And so therefore, we have a lot of organizations that actually track this within our country very well. And so it's just sort of the data that I was given. And so let's maybe end our episode today by talking about some culturally significant dog breeds and sort of where they're largely from, or at least popular within. And so, Hunter, we already talked about the Labrador Retriever. And so this is a very popular dog here in the United States. It's also very popular in the UK, although maybe not the most popular. And so I have here that the Labrador Retriever, is very highly regarded for its very friendly nature, its versatility. There's also one source that I have here that says that they're highly regarded for their intelligence. I would say that my experience with Labradors is that they're not actually the smartest dogs.
Well, maybe that was the individuals. I don't know.
Maybe that's the individuals. But that said, I would say that they're very easily able to be trained to do specific tasks. And maybe that's what people are thinking of when they think intelligence, because Labradors are often used as guide dogs, therapy dogs, search and rescue, this kind of stuff. In Japan, we talked a little bit about the Shiba Inu.
That's right.
But there's also another dog called the Akita Inu, which is considered, in sort of sources I could find, that it's considered to be almost a national treasure in Japan. This type of dog, and it is in my research a very highly photographed dog. It's very seems to be very prized by Japanese culture, and so. There's a story that goes with this, the story of Hachiko and Akita, who faithfully awaited his deceased owner at a train station every day for years. And that has left a lasting impression on the breed's loyalty.
There's a statue of this in Shibuya, I believe, in Tokyo. There's really? There's this famous statue of exactly what you're describing, of this dog who's just been waiting for his owner. And so, that's part of that. That's the really close to what's sometimes referred to as the busiest intersection in the world.
Right. And, we often think of, obviously a common theme in this episode is a dog's loyalty. But there do appear to be dogs that have loyalty built in a little bit more into their breed. And it does seem like the Akita might be one of those based on my...
Inu is dog, I believe, in Japanese.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that tracks. Shiba Inu, Akita Inu. Okay. In Germany, what dog might we be talking about for Germany?
The Dachshund or the German Shepherd?
Got to be the German Shepherd. I mean, the Dachshund as well. Yeah. But the German Shepherd, probably I would say the most popular dog that comes out of Germany, just because, it's very quintessential, has a very quintessential look to it, although Dachshunds do as well. But German Shepherds are renowned for their intelligence and versatility. And they were originally bred for herding, but are most often seen used in police and military roles, as well as search and rescues. That said, I know German Shepherds, purebreds, have a growing issue with, I believe it's hip dysplasia. And so you'll often see a German Shepherd that sort of has a sloping back as it hits their tail. And historically, if you look at an old, from maybe the early 1900s, they have a pretty straight, maybe even sloping up back. Okay. And so this becomes a common theme with breeds as well, is that, as you're breeding these dogs over and over again, certain traits that might be good are prevalent, but certain traits that might be bad are also prevalent and get exacerbated. Moving along, I'm going to skip over a couple here just for time, but there's one dog that I want to talk about. It's called the Basenji, and my dog is half Basenji, so I had to talk about him. And this is a dog from Central Africa. And so the Basenji is one of the oldest dog breeds in the world, and it's often associated with the early development of dogs. And so obviously I would assume most people listening to this are familiar with dogs, and dogs bark, right? I would say pretty much every
barking, right?
Very well known for barking. In fact, we had a whole, part of our cat episode where we talked a little bit about cats that roared or didn't roar. Right. And that sort of seems to be a split. Mm-hmm. Dogs, basically all dogs bark, except for the Basenji. The Basenji does not bark. It is considered a barkless dog due to its unique vocalizations. And so what they do is they do something called yodeling instead. And so my dog can bark, but he most often yodels, which is sort of a high-pitched whine that sort of goes up and down based on sort of pitches that he's trying to emote his emotions with.
Wow.
So if you want to see a picture of my dog, it'll be inside our Substack show notes here. I would include it in the show notes for everyone, but I don't think I can for our apps. But you can see a picture of him. He's only half. His other half is miniature pinscher. So, so again, the dog Basenjis are from Central Africa, and they were often used for hunting and were valued for their independence and intelligence. And boy, is my dog independent and intelligent. He knows what I'm saying, but he doesn't often follow what I want him to do. I see.
Yeah. Sounds kind of like a cat in some ways.
He's in a lot of ways very cat-like. Yes.
Whereas the Flame Point Siamese follows us around like a dog sometimes.
Interesting.
Very, very affectionate cat. Yeah.
Oh, so cute. Going over to China, we already talked a little bit about the Shar-Pei, so let's talk about a different one, which is the Chow Chow. Are you familiar with the Chow Chow?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, it's, so the Chow Chow is, in China, it's often associated with nobility and was used for hunting, herding, and guarding, as most dogs were. But the breed has a very distinctive blue-black tongue. And so if you ever see one, if you're ever curious whether that dog's a Chow Chow or not, simply try and get a look at its tongue. And if it's blue or black, then it's absolutely is.
It's the telltale sign.
Yeah. And, these dogs, they often look kind of like teddy bears too. They're very cute. That said, apparently they're not good with children. So if you have kids, don't get one thinking it's, a cute, fluffy teddy bear, because, apparently they don't have a lot of patience for children.
Interesting.
So, note that. There's the Dalmatian. The Dalmatian is from Croatia. And we already talked a little bit about 101 Dalmatians, and I just want to call them out here because of that sort of cultural touch points. But the Dalmatian is recognized for its unique spotted coat and originates from the historic region of Dalmatia within Croatia, where they were used as guard dogs and carriage dogs. And this is a breed that gained enormous popularity after the movie 101 Dalmatians came out. And so we don't see them quite as often anymore because that popularity has waned a little bit.
Right. The original cartoon was from a while ago.
Yeah. The original cartoon was from a while ago. And it did, Dalmatians were popping up everywhere across, I would say, probably Europe and the US and probably Canada as well.
1961 is when the animated film first came out.
Oh, interesting. So let's finish with, let's do two more breeds of dogs here. So there is the Siberian Husky. We talked a little about the Husky earlier when we were talking about Russia, obviously from Siberia. And they were bred by the Chukchi people for basically for the purpose of sled pulling, guarding, and companionship. And they're recognized kind of globally for their endurance and their resilience for cold weather. So I have a friend, he lives on the other side of the country, but I had a friend here in Portland who had a Husky. And during the few times that it would snow here in Portland, his dog basically refused to be anywhere but outside.
Wow.
Because, as a Husky, it wants to be in the snow, it wants to lay in the snow. It's sort of its natural element. And he had sort of a low-lying fence. And so people sort of walking could see, that this dog was outside and sort of in the snow. And so he eventually had to hang up a sign that said, "My dog will refuse to come inside. It is perfectly fine. It's a Husky. It can endure these temperatures. Please don't call the, animal shelter, whatever. Yeah. On me." Because what they're going to do is they're just going to come out and say, "Oh, this is clearly just a Husky being in snow." And that's perfectly normal. But apparently it happened enough times that he needed to have a sign up. This breed gained international recognition when a relay of Husky teams delivered life-saving serum to Nome, Alaska during a diphtheria outbreak in 1925. So Alaska, the Iditarod, we often think of, sort of sled pulling.
Right.
And so it's also used as a method of transportation, particularly in the early 1900s when you couldn't just take a helicopter, obviously, or a plane to these far-flung areas of Alaska. And so I think what we'll end here on is a dog that I thought was really cool to learn more about, and that is the Xolo Inzquintli, also known as the Xolo, which is also known as the Mexican hairless dog, Hunter. And so this is an ancient breed. It was considered sacred by the sort of the Aztecs, the Toltecs, the Maya. It's a dog that's been around for thousands of years. And it was really, within these sort of ancient cultures, believed to be the guide, to guide the deceased through the underworld. And what we're going to find out is that, some of these beliefs still sort of track within sort of modern day culture of, places such as Mexico, Guatemala, and all these countries that sort of maintain a lot of that cultural significance too. So, for example, today, the Xolo is considered a national treasure in Mexico and serves as sort of a cultural symbol appearing in various works and cultural expressions. But what I want to talk a little bit about, Hunter, is a specific movie. It's a Pixar movie that prominently features one of these dogs. What movie might I be talking about?
I believe it's Coco.
It is absolutely Coco, which personally is one of my favorite Pixar movies, and it features the Mexican hairless dog. It's a dog called his name is Dante inside the film. And the reason why I wanted to bring this up is because while that movie is really good, I think it ties a lot of Mexican culture specifically into sort of a fun format that's talking a lot about sort of the afterlife and sort of these cultural customs such as Dia de los Muertos. I think now, having understood sort of the cultural aspect of the Xolo inside in sort of these cultures, it gives me a new profound respect for how they treated that character Dante, which is sort of some minor spoiler alerts here, but so this is sort of your warning now. But if you did watch the movie, you'll recognize that the little boy character at some point he sort of finds his way through some supernatural event, finds his way into the afterlife. And that's sort of the journey, right? He's going through this area where there's, basically people who had died previously and trying to figure out a way to get back. But throughout it, his dog, which is a Xolo, is sort of with him throughout. And this is Dante. But Dante doesn't have a supernatural event that gets him into the afterlife and out of it.
He's able to go between worlds.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, he's not even necessarily able to go in between at will, but he's connected to the main character and is just able to sort of do that. And I think the creators of the movie were very attuned to this sort of reputation of this dog, this cultural significance, in that they just sort of had him go along with the boy without any sort of intervention. And I thought that was a really cool way to sort of subtly signify that Dante himself, even though he's a funny comedic character throughout the movie, is also a very culturally significant part of the movie that sort of goes back to this idea of them being guides to the deceased, because obviously his little boy, sort of friend, companion, what have you, is now, with all of these afterlife figures. So I thought that was a very cool, subtle nod to this dog's history and cultural significance.
As an unexpected tie-in to the Lego episode, there's just a new series of minifigs from Disney minifigs, and there are two characters from Coco. One of them is Ernesto de la Cruz, which is a fantastically detailed minifig, and then the other one is Miguel. And Dante is there too. So Dante has been recreated in Lego form.
Naturally, yes. And Miguel is the little boy character that I've been talking about. Right. And so with that, I've talked quite a bit about dogs. So I think we are going to leave it here. And I really hope that you enjoyed learning not only about dogs, but I hope you listened to last week's episode about cats as well, because these were two very fun episodes for myself, now a dog person, although I really love cats, and Hunter with his cats as well. Hunter, do you want to run through some pluggables?
Absolutely. I'm Hunter Shobi. I'm a professor of geography at Portland State University. I am co-author of Portland as a Cultural Atlas and Upper Left Cities, a cultural atlas of San Francisco, Portland, and Seattle. David Banas is my co-author there, and I am co-host of this podcast with you, Geoff.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I am the co-host of this podcast, Geography is Everything, but you can also find me over on YouTube. That's youtube.com/geography by Geoff, spelled like a Geoff, if that helps you find me. You can find me on various places around the internet as well. It's just Geography by Geoff as well. And you find me on Instagram. I'm also on Threads, if that's your flavor. I don't really do Twitter or whatever it's called these days, because I think they just changed their name. If you liked what you heard today, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or whatever app you use to listen. If that option is available to you, it really helps us within those rankings. And it's just kind of nice to see that people like us enough to leave a few kind words for us. And of course, if you like us even more and you want to go one step further and engage with us even more, go on over to geographyiseverything.substack.com and subscribe there. And you can subscribe for free and get a little extra geography each week, or you can become a premium subscriber and get a bunch of extra benefits and even more geography, including listening to this podcast with no ads, as well as some bonus episodes that come every now and then. And so that's a really fun place for us to sort of, build our geography sort of community. So we hope to see you there. And I guess next time, I think our next episode, Hunter, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's going to be about Star Wars.
That's the plan.
Yeah. Yeah. It should be a fun one. So Hunter's preparing that. I'm starting to do a little bit of research on Mount Everest as an episode as well. So we'll see how those episodes shape up, and maybe those will be the next ones. Until next time, we'll see you later.
Thank you for listening.